Susan, thank you for coming along and being part of Talking Barefoot.
Okay, I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad because I know it's Sunday and it's Chinese New Year, actually, which was just happening outside earlier today, and you could have been part of that. So.
I know, and I could have been lying in my bed, but here we are.
Yeah, I know, which is how I would normally spend Sunday. So I do appreciate that we're both making the effort here. Talking Barefoot. This is one of our first podcasts that we're doing, but you have been involved in the project for it's nearly 2 years now. Mm-hmm. So, but before we get to that, let's talk about how we met and how long we've known each other, because that is a little over 2 years.
Yes, it is. Would it be 1988? I was trying to remember.
I think it was roundabout then. I think you were my babysitter.
Yeah.
That's the official story, but it's not true.
Yeah, we met in nursery school in 1988.
We totally did. So it's 1988. What happened next?
Well, we met in the office, an office friendship, wasn't it?
It was.
And those, I don't know if people still do. Those were the days when you went in, at our age anyway, which was very, very young. You went into work in the daytime, and then at night you just hung about round about here, really. We did a lot of hanging about in Soho. Well,
I think specifically we did a lot of hanging about in pubs.
Yes. Yes.
Pubs and Jimmy the Greek's restaurant in Soho.
Absolutely.
Jimmy the Greek's was a favourite.
Yeah, and Paulo's.
Paulo.
Yeah.
Paulo.
Yeah. But those were the days.
Compton Street.
I just don't know if, you live here, so you know whether it still happens.
No, they're both gone. They're both gone. And nobody goes to the office anymore, apparently.
No.
You know, so a lot has changed.
It has. But I mean, that is the story. We spent many years just hanging about in pubs and after work, really, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
We did, getting absolutely trashed because we were that age where you could get trashed every night and still turn up the next day reasonably fresh.
Yeah. Well, and even if you weren't fresh, you turned up anyway.
You still turned up.
Yeah.
And I loved the fact that you were this fast track, high-powered graduate it was a government department we worked for. It no longer exists as a department.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, it was to do with employment, which was one of those 1984 terms, it seemed to me, because really the thing that we were dealing with at the time was unemployment.
That's right, yeah.
But we met, you were this fast track, high-powered graduate, and I was a would-be singer-songwriter temping.
That's right.
I would sit and type.
And talk.
Oh, did I talk?
Yeah, because it was at the time, because no one had computers on their desks. I deal with young people now, and I sometimes tell them that to scare them. You know, when I first went to work, you didn't have a computer. We just had a person who sat in the corner and did the typing. And mostly they just sat quietly and did the typing. And then we got you, and you just sat in the corner and talked. And also redrafted our typing for us, I seem to remember. You know, couldn't really bring yourself to type something up if it had been badly written. So you'd get your draft back with editing by Angus, which wasn't really in your job description. But
it definitely wasn't.
It was appreciated, you know.
Well, I kind of made a career out of that as a temp. I mean, that was how I ended up working in HIV, because I temped for the longest time, and the people who kept me on were the people who loved the way I rewrote everything instead of just typing it. And that was how I ended up working with this incredible woman in the HIV, the AIDS unit, as it was called, at the Department of Health. And then that was a whole new career for me, where I actually started doing a proper grown-up job. Eventually. But you were already doing a proper grown-up job when we met. And I did think you were amazing, which is why we're still friends, and it's now 2024. So that, I mean, we don't even need to do the math.
No, we don't need to.
We don't need to do the math.
No.
So, but you were working on government policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you carried on doing that. And tell me about tell me what's the story of you and government policy?
Well, yeah, I stayed in government on that track for about 20 odd years, I suppose, doing I did a lot of employment. I did some work in the Cabinet Office and a small amount in the European Commission. Just the way you diddle about doing different things.
Because you went to Brussels, didn't you?
I was in
that. You lived in Brussels.
Yeah. I did. I mean, to be quite honest, I was not, I left in the end because I felt I'd just done everything I wanted to do in Whitehall, which makes it sound like, I had conquered Whitehall. I wasn't really that.
Oh, I'm pretty sure you did. I'm pretty sure you did.
But I just got to the point where there wasn't anything left that I was finding very attractive. And so I left to do more grassroots stuff. And so I've been doing stuff with charities, more grassroots charities since then.
But before you left, you were in the Cabinet Office. Mm-hmm. So you were, and you were quite a senior person in the Cabinet Office. You were handling stuff that was going on in Downing Street. You were dealing with the Prime Minister's team, that kind of thing. So I would say that you conquered Whitehall. And I'm pretty sure that Whitehall really for 20 years tried to conquer you and never did, which I love about you.
No, well, I didn't exactly fit into the mould. No. Definitely. Yes, absolutely. It was a difficult fit. But I mean, I enjoyed it hugely, and there was I had a lot of interesting experiences there and learned a lot. And since then, having left, that's why I went and I did a bit more studying around public policy because you're left with a sort of fascination about how these things work and how government actually happens.
And tell me about that, because I know that you went back to university. Mm-hmm. Did you do a master's?
I did a master's while I was still a civil servant.
I remember that, yes.
In Birkbeck. And then once I left, went and did my PhD, which I finally finished after an inordinate amount of time, but I did. And that was, I remain fascinated by the mechanics of government and how it tries to do things in society and sometimes succeeds and sometimes fails. So I continue to be fascinated by the...
And now you're Dr. Susan McLaren with a fascination for policy.
Yes, exactly.
And we are humbled and honoured that despite our total lack of funding, which is a plug, by the way, for anybody out there that would like to fund us, despite our lack of funding, you are our putative, let's call it that, our putative head of policy at Barefoot Man. And some of our viewers may be familiar with Alex and Sebastian, twin brothers, who've taken part in the project in a very different way, who are our heads of data research. And you are kind of going to be working with how we translate our data, what data we want to collect, and how we then translate the data that we collect into
insights that might influence and inspire action by, it could central government or it could be other governmental tiers, local government, quangos, whatever. Yes, absolutely.
And it can also be grassroots organizations. It can be corporate bodies. It can be anyone. I mean, we can offer policy suggestions, I guess, that are relevant to any institution, I suppose.
Yes, yeah, and I mean, increasingly, I think central government is realising that it needs to bring all those organisations in if it's going to have any effect, particularly if you're talking about behavioural change, which is kind of the arena in which you're working. So, central government has not a great record, actually, of affecting behavioural change on its own. So it really needs to bring as many other bodies and tiers of society in as it can.
I mean, that's very interesting because you may remember when I left the Department of Health, eventually the AIDS unit, and went and worked for European organisations on HIV. And then was approached by the Terence Higgins Trust, which was and is the UK's leading grassroots organization on the response to HIV.
Yeah.
And this was at a time where behavioral change, as you just mentioned, was managed by the Health Education Authority, a government body entirely funded and controlled by government, although in theory, sort of, I suppose, semi-autonomous. I remember at the Department of Health, we had meetings with the top people from the HEA all the time, and my boss was best friends with the head of HEA and so on. And there was nothing wrong with that. I mean, they were collaborating colleagues. My job at the Terence Higgins Trust was to develop the plan to take government funding away from managing the behavioral change of men who have sex with men,
right,
to reduce HIV infection rates. And we won that contract, and it doubled the size of Terence Higgins Trust overnight.
That's all right.
And it was the very first time that government health promotion was delivered by an outside organisation, and it was called CHAPS. I remember that name.
I remember CHAPS. And how different was that to what the government body had been doing? Did it make a huge difference to the approach?
Well, yes, it really did, because the HEA was constantly concerned about the language that they would use. They had to invent the term rectal sex because anal sex was a term that would only appear in like pornographic literature or porn videos or something like that. It was like nice people did not talk about anal sex, and
whereas rectal sex is totally unarousing and therefore fine. Yeah, more medical.
What family does not talk about rectal sex around the dinner table? So, and it was pointed out by doctors that really the rectum isn't the point. But the HEA was like, yeah, but we can't say anal sex. The government, the politicians won't allow it. So I think that the massive change that it made was that it enabled government to distance itself from the message. Yeah. So if anybody said, Terence Higgins Trust has done this campaign and they talk about dicks, the government can say, because that's, they're a grassroots organization and their job is to reach the people that will respond to that message, and that's why we're funded them. It's got nothing. We've got no hands-on control.
We had no idea what they were doing, and we've never read any of this.
Nothing to do with us. Nothing. And that I think was a sea change. And I think the other thing was that it did enable people like me to feel, I can be part of influencing behavioral change. So it made it all less authoritarian. It was less of the, those public service broadcasts we had back in the days of childhood and televisions where, you'd be sitting and there would be, oh, look, he's got a rubber dinghy, or, it was like somebody drowning.
Learn to swim, young man.
Learn to swim. Don't be an amber gambler.
You see, they obviously were effective. You remember them all. Yeah, the question is, are you still an amber gambler?
I'm totally an amber gambler. So, no, actually, you know what? I'm not, actually. I think maybe that ad worked. But I think there was a recognition that it was too patronizing, and
one of the insights in behavioural economics, which is the big trendy thing in public policy now since Thaler got his Nobel Prize for all this stuff. I think
you're going to have to tell us about Thaler getting his Nobel Prize.
Well, he got his Nobel Prize for behavioural economics, which is where economists, having discovered psychology, really, where they realised that rather than the model they had been working on, which is that we're all rational people who go around simply doing the most rational thing to maximise our own profits, actually people make decisions for other reasons in ways that appear irrational from an economic point of view. And so having got interested in this, they started to bring insights from psychology in. And government then started to get interested in it. And it's things like the principle of inertia, which is that people, it's not really, inertia always sounds like laziness, but it's not. It's people don't want to change what they're doing. They like the status quo. So actually, if you try to exhort, if the government tries to exhort people to do something, it's very difficult to get them to do it. But if you automatically get them, put them in a position, then they will stay in it. So pensions, you've got this new auto-enrollment for pensions where they, instead of telling you to get a pension, because they've been telling you for years you ought to get a pension, and everyone agrees you ought to get a pension, but they just never do anything about it.
Right.
So you put people in a pension and you say you can opt out if you like, but we're just automatically doing it for you. That's where that came from. It came from the insights of behavioural economics. Now, where was I telling you? But yes, another of the insights of behavioural economics is that if you want people to do things, you get their peers to tell them about it. If you want people to take on board information, you get their peers to tell them the information. You get the people who they trust to tell them. And actually, that's never government. So, it's never a good idea for government to simply hand down information to you or advice to you, because it doesn't work. You have to find the people that people trust and that they feel are like them and whose experience of life is their experience of life, and the information and the advice needs to be channeled through those people, because people will take it on board. So that's really what CHAPS was doing.
Absolutely. And I think in a way you're also describing, although we might not see it in quite such sort of philanthropic terms, it's sort of what social media influencers are doing.
Well, it's certainly the insight that companies are recognising. Rather than us tell you to buy something, we'll get someone who looks like the sort of person you'd want to be friends with to get you to buy it. Absolutely. And it's like all these things. They can be used for good or for evil, Angus.
Indeed.
They're just instruments, and they can be used for bad purposes, but they can also be used for beneficial ones.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny, because I was talking to somebody the other day about Barefoot Man and what we've done, and somebody said, why are you not the Warwick Rowers anymore? And it's like, well, we were always trying to be a therapeutic intervention. It was meant to be straight men in sport saying to gay men, you can be in sport with us. And if you're in the changing rooms with us, and you might want to look at us naked, and we're cool with that.
Yeah. We're
cool with your sexuality. We're cool with you being who you are. And we understand that if we're going to be in this space together, you're going to be able to explore your sexuality in a way that maybe we're not exploring ours, but in pretty much every other area of life, our sexuality dominates. So this can be a nice opportunity for us to get a different perspective. And that was really at the heart of what we evolved as our message in the Warwick Rowers. And I suppose in a way I'd learned so much about behavioural change and, health promotion from CHAPS. And then we realised that our therapeutic intervention, some people were just actually crushing it up and snorting it. It's like they'd gone way off label. They were not looking at the guidelines on the packaging. And things can be. That's the way the world. You can't control people. I mean, you can't. You put things out there, and the fact that they're having beneficial effects, is never going to stop some people taking them the wrong way and using them for their own purposes. There's nothing you can do about that. Absolutely. I mean, the rowers always understood that that they would be looked at in whatever way, and they were offering that space. They were saying, you can look at us however you like. Just know that this is our intention. And whatever your intention is yours. But what we found was that people were ignoring our intention and also not really recognizing their own intention. And that for some people, they started to have quite a toxic relationship with the project. They were sending, abusive, trolly messages to me, really? To the rowers. Yeah. And it's like, oh, okay, we really need to address this. Hello there, Barefoot family. We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. As you can probably tell, I love talking to Susan. So don't go anywhere because we have plenty more to talk about. But please be sure to follow us across all the social channels to be kept up to date with news, features, and fabulous content for barefoot living. Click on the link below to visit our website. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the episode. The thing about what we observed with the way that some of the men were engaging with the project, it made me realize that the straight male gaze and the gay male gaze, they're 66% the same. Male gaze, you've got those two things going on. And it was along with #MeToo.
Yeah.
I think it was part of our journey away from focusing solely on homophobia to recognizing that actually there's a problem with the rules that men grow up with, whatever.
I mean, effectively, you were just suffering what women suffer all the time, who put themselves out there and attract a load of trolling back for no good reason. I mean, it's the same. It's the same effect.
Absolutely, it is the same. And I was really intrigued by that new research that we're going to talk about from King's College London about the rise of anti-feminism and misogynistic thinking among younger men. I mean, I was very surprised by it. What did you think? Yeah, because you tend to imagine that things are getting more progressive as we go along. But the more I thought about it, I mean, actually, you talk about Me Too movement, etc., and the fourth wave of feminism or whatever. It's not entirely surprising that there's a pushback from it. Every time women push forward and ask for more in terms of their rights and good treatment, it's not entirely surprising that men should find that slightly threatening. And maybe it is, I don't know why it's the younger men, because it's not evident in the millennials apparently. But I don't know, is that, it could be because it's being reflected through the TikTok generation and I think the sense was,
they're gathering.
Wasn't it that it's very much related to social media? Yeah,
they're in a bit of a bubble. But also the young men these are men who have not yet established themselves in the world. So that potential sort of feeling of threat that, our position is being threatened is maybe it's maybe more difficult for them. If you're a man in your 30s, you've established yourself, then you're not so threatened by the thought that women are pushing forward. But maybe when you're younger, it's harder.
Well, isn't there this growing sort of... Well, my sense is that some men, and they can be 80 or they can be 18, but men see this as a zero-sum game. Yeah. So if women or black people or LGBT people are gaining, then it's actually at their cost. They have less if somebody else has more. And so there seemed to me, what I was like reading between the lines, it was sort of men are feeling threatened. They're feeling like their job is being taken away and there's no new job to go to. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we have to face as a reality is that people have genuinely had that experience over the last half century of jobs disappearing and not being replaced. I
mean, there is the fact that the world is generally a scarier place. If everything was expanding and there was more of everything, then the idea that women would get their fair share of it might not be quite so threatening. But if you feel that the world is shrinking and there's less to be had. And it's really noticeable how the whole Andrew Tate business is not just about sex, it's about material gain. I mean, he spends as much, I say he spends as much time, I don't actually listen to Andrew Tate, but I get the impression he spends as much time talking about his cars as he does about women. It's about your share of the stuff.
Yes,
and
it is.
and they're threatened about all of that they're not going to
Absolutely.
get their fair share, I think.
Yeah, that absolutely, and similarly, I think that people have been attracted to populist leaders because they feel that globalization
Yeah.
has failed to deliver for them.
Yeah.
It's delivered for other people. It's delivered for the sort of metropolitan elites
Yeah.
who are out of touch. And it means that people in working class communities in more rural areas away from the big sort of centers of power, they've just been kind of left by the wayside.
Yeah.
And I think that some men feel something that is sort of parallel to that. I think that's really interesting, and it's something that, hopefully we can come on to that in another podcast, because one of our trustees at Sport Allies he has worked in education, I think, most of his life. And I think he would be an interesting person to bring in on that conversation. So, in terms of your perspective as a woman on this, what did you think about about this kind of I suppose this spectre of regression?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, obviously there is a feeling of, we've got this far and we're going backwards. I think what I mostly thought, though, when I was reading about it was, and this happens all the time, so I think they said it's 1 in 5 of the 16 to 29-year-olds, I think they said feminism was largely more a bad thing than a good thing. It was something like that, they said.
Yes.
And it's natural that we then focus on that 1 in 5. Why do they feel like that? How can we stop them feeling like that? And increasingly with these sort of things, my interest is in the 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5 of these boys are not feeling like that, or men. And they're on TikTok and they're in the same world, and they're, so I think there's something about approaching it with a more positive slant, which is to say, if we think there are all these pressures, let's look at the boys and men for whom those pressures are not resulting in those feelings about women, and find out why that is. And is there something insight we can learn from that we can use to spread those more positive feelings? Why are those boys and men able to cope with the world as it is and not turn it against women? And is there something we can... And going back to that social message, of behavioural economics,
Yes.
actually, rather than us telling those 1 in 5 what they ought to be doing, we should maybe be enlisting the 4 out of 5 boys and men that don't feel like that to spread those messages, because it's going to come from them much more convincingly than it will come from us, as older people, certainly.
Well,
I realise...
Speak for yourself,
Yes,
Susan.
quite, yeah.
But no, I think that's a really... I think you've expressed really well exactly what our mission is here. We're here to create opinion leaders amongst peer groups.
Yeah.
Who will be there saying, actually, I did this thing. I went on this course. I posed for this calendar, or I went to this retreat, and I see things differently as a result. And I want to, share my experience with you, or here's why I think if you haven't had that experience, you should hear what I have to say.
Yeah. That's right.
And
let them talk in their own...
Absolutely.
Their own voice, yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's exactly what we're here to do, and I think that it's going to be amazing to working with Alex and Sebastian.
Yeah.
To make sure that we're asking the right questions, first of all, because for me the questions aren't just for men, and that's the other big change that. We have I'd say about 30% of our followers on Instagram are female, but it used to be more. I think that's partly about how Instagram works, where we're shadow banned. But I think we want to promote barefoot women as a proposition to women, because women are also opinion leaders. Their opinion, I mean, in heterosexual relationships, women have, they're equal stakeholders, hopefully, in that relationship, and therefore, if they come across barefoot man, they might say to their boyfriend, here's something that I think could be good for our relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's an interesting area for us to explore. And I wonder, do you believe that we can appeal to women in that way?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, I think women are very interested in how men are thinking about them, and so I mean, yeah. And so if the discussion is about we need to work together on the stereotypes of masculinity that are obviously affecting women badly, but are actually also really constraining and harmful for men, then I think women would be interested in exploring that and understanding what's going on in men's heads around that whole area. Yeah, I think so. And I think that the issue of sort of working with the men who are more positive, to some extent, you're always going to be doing that. I mean, you're unlikely to attract an Andrew Tate follower right away, you know, off the bat to one of your courses. You're working with men who are already open to the idea of learning and developing, and know, so that is the idea, is to work with the people who are already positive to develop that and help them to understand exactly what is going on, help the women to understand what's going on, and then they actually can convey that sort of stuff to the people who are less enlightened. Well, I'm trying to think of a better word of this, but less. I think less we can go with enlightened. Less open.
Less open. I think I tweeted the other day. I won't go into the specifics of the story because it'll date this too much, but I tweeted something about a government minister who is the Minister for Health the Minister for Women and Equalities. And I felt that she had behaved in a way that was not very supportive of either women or equalities. And I posted on Twitter and I really got called out. I mean, 600 people loved it, and about 25 actually really came after me.
Because they agreed with her, or just because they didn't?
I'm a man.
Oh, and you don't, yeah.
And I'm not allowed to speak on behalf of women. And I said, well, I'm not speaking on behalf of women. And also, she's the Minister for Women and Equalities. And so actually, I'm a stakeholder in equalities, even if it's decided that I'm not allowed to comment on anything to do with women. But for me, I mean, it was interesting because it was, that song Stuck in the Middle. It's like Dancer to the left, me Jokers to the right. Here I am stuck in the middle. And it was like, I'm getting attacked from both sides.
Oh, well, that's always a sign you're doing something right. Both sides are attacking you.
There was somebody saying, are you trans? And I'm like, well, I don't, what's that got to do with this? And somebody else saying, you can't speak about this, you're a man. Some of these people were quite right-wing. Some of these people were quite left-wing. And where am I trying to get to with this? I think it's the... it's this tribal mentality, first of all.
Yeah.
But I also want to ask you if you feel, as a woman, that I can be an ally of women and can speak up and say, Minister for Women and Equalities, do better. Or should I, as somebody said, sit down and shut up because I'm a man?
Well, I think you asked me as a woman, but I suspect your view on this is more to do with just, a general approach to life. My general approach to life is that, it's better if anyone says what's on their minds, really, than shutting up. So I wouldn't feel you shouldn't speak. But that may be less to do with my authoritative position as a woman than just my approach to life generally. I'd rather people spoke.
No, fair enough.
And it was dealt with.
Yeah.
But I think the thing about the tribalism thing is you don't want to just replace one set of rigid lines with another set of rigid lines.
No, we don't.
So an equality between men and women. Surely what we're realising now is that it's not even just as simple as men and women. There's lots more going on. Men are there's plenty of men who feel that the stereotypes around men actually exclude them as much as they exclude, well, maybe not as much as they exclude women. They don't exclude them through law and, age-old tradition. But there are men who are excluded from that, classic stereotype of the proper man.
Oh, for sure.
So, I think the breaking down of all those lines seems to be better to me than simply, shouting at each other across this one divide.
And yet we are apparently fragmented. It's like, although a lot of us have recognised that, like, this sort of, I suppose, like, patriarchal heteronormative paradigm that, existed up until maybe, I don't know, the end of the Second World War or something like that, or beyond. Feminism started in feminism and gay rights, really, where they were certainly,
don't forget the suffragettes.
Well, exactly. I mean, the thing is that, the assertion of a particular model of masculinity was almost a 19th century invention, and pretty much as soon as it began, some women were starting to say, no, I don't think so. I don't think I want to wear a whalebone corset. I think I'd like to vote. I think I'd like to go to work. And like urbanization and industrialization seemed to me to be key to that, because women were no longer as reliant on men and on particular models of social behavior. And I think a lot of these models of social behavior emerged in the second half of the 19th century as a response to urbanization and industrialization, because there were so many more things that women could suddenly do. They could drive, they could, because these things were then being really done by machines. So male muscle power no longer held sway. And I think also when you put people in an urban environment rather than a remote rural environment, it's like, what are the rules? Because people have a lot more options available to them all of a sudden. It's why I came to London from County Antrim at the age of 19. I knew I would have a bigger menu to choose from in terms of the sort of people I would meet. One of them was you, and I think that the people who feel the need to control society, if you like. I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it's like, how do we organize and how do we maintain law and order? And even in the sort of in the 70s, the sort of the conservative focus was on the family, the nuclear family. And I remember when Clause 28 came in, and that was about pretend family relationships. It was gay relationships were judged in relation to what were considered natural family relationships and found to be wanting. But that was the construct. The construct was that the nuclear family, man and woman and children, was society, was nature's rule.
I think, a free society without those kind of structures is frightening to a lot of people. Basically, I think any attempt to, as society seems to break down, or at least that's what it seems to be doing, is breaking down. That's very frightening to people, and people will try and put all those structures back in to control it. And that may be what's behind, as we said, with those younger men who are feeling, some of them are actually attracted to that idea of the traditional roles because it's, there's some sort of order about that, and it holds out some kind of entirely deceptive, but some kind of promise that there's a place for them, and as long as they behave in the right way, there's a place for them in society and a road for them to go down, which is less frightening than the thought that actually there are, there aren't those rules, and there's no particular role set out for you, and you're going to have to build your own life the way everyone else is. That's frightening to a lot of people, I think.
I mean, and I think that this is an example of something that's happening to a lot of groups of people, isn't it? I mean, this is an example of how that fear and sense of uncertainty is being co-opted by bad actors. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't mean Lawrence Fox specifically. He is a bad actor. I mean, I don't think I've actually ever watched him.
Oh, I think he's quite a good actor.
Well, he might be quite a good actor in this sort of narrow confines of television.
In Lewis, he was very good.
Right, there you go. On the broader platform, on the broader stage of life, he does seem to be, in many people's view, a bad actor.
Yeah.
And there are quite a lot of bad actors around, and Andrew Tate is another.
Yeah, well, it's a way to popularity, isn't it? You tell people what they want to hear, and what they want to hear is, you're right. Actually, you ought to have a really important place in this society. Society owes it to you. Yes. And actually, you've been right all along. That the things that are making you frightened should be removed, and society should be ordered to give you your place. Of course, people want to hear that. That's a comforting and soothing thing to be told to someone who's frightened. And I've spotted whose fault it is. And if we only remove those people, then life will return to the way it should be, where you've got, you're just desserts. You've got a woman, and you've got a car, and you've got a big house, and whatever it is that Tate promises them, which is those things as far as I understand it. Though weirdly, when they tracked him down to his place in Romania, he doesn't seem to have that desirable a house, but there you go. I think
there are quite a lot of people on social media projecting a lifestyle that doesn't bear too much scrutiny in reality. And I think that I read a book recently. Well, I say read. It was on Audible. Not going to lie.
Well, that's okay.
But I read most of my books on Audible, and I fall asleep during them and then wake up.
You absorbed the book.
I think absorbed is a better way of putting it. And it was about relatively recent research into authoritarianism, and what they were saying is that there's a pretty fixed percentage of the population who do not want to be authoritarian leaders. They do not want to be leaders at all. But they want to be led by an authoritarian.
Yeah, I think they're more scared of their fellow people than they are of an authority. They want an authoritarian leader that control everyone around them because they're frightened of.
Yeah.
And I think there is something about those men who feel like that, say that 1 in 5 of those 16 to 29-year-olds. I'm putting a lot on them, of course. The first thing would be to sit down and ask them why they feel like that. I mean, I would be fascinated to actually just hear them. But I mean, the seems to me one of the problems is that there's a tendency to say, well, women are going to get their just rights, and I'm sorry it makes you feel bad, but they're, suck it up. And actually, that may not be enough to, if they're feeling threatened, and they've got some people telling them the thing to do is to return, for the other side, for the progressive side, to simply leave them to deal with it may not be enough. We may need to think about what messages they need to be given that actually provide them with a different sort of comfort, that this new world is one, this world that they're frightened of is actually one that they can thrive in, and that they shouldn't feel frightened of. But we tend to just kind of, well, they're not worth They're not worth thinking about.
I completely agree with you, and I think that what we're trying to develop at Barefoot Man and the policies that I hope will come out of the because this is action research. This always was. You know, it started with me and a camera and a group of rowers, and we were doing action research, is what we called it back in the 90s in HIV. And it still is. You know, now we're saying to men, get involved, and women, get involved online in our discussions, join our channels on social media, take part in our research programs, come on retreats, whatever. And it's an opportunity to create new ways of expressing and relating to masculinity that are actually better. Because I think the thing is that, going back to what we said earlier, too many men think it is a zero-sum game, and every move away from the established rules of patriarchal privilege are going to be to their detriment.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
what we must not do is do what, previous administrations did to the mining communities in England and Wales, or to the Rust Belt in the United States.
Yeah.
We cannot hold out a promise to people and then fail to deliver.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
This cannot be about saying this is how you have to be now.
Yeah.
And then it's like, but you're never going to have a
with
good
a sort
life.
with a sort of underlying feeling of you lost that game, so there you go. I mean, it's unsurprising that they take that badly. I mean, the irony, of course, is that the sort of world that Andrew Tate holds out is the ultimate competitive world. He's not intending for all these men and boys to succeed. His notion of the world is, a pyramid with him at the top.
Oh, it's winner takes all with him. Absolutely.
Yeah, he's not actually holding out a particularly comfortable. I suppose he tells them they're going to be if you believe, if you can make yourself believe you will be one of the people who are victorious in the world, then it's comforting. But
I think,
it's a harsh. The traditional male archetype is a harsh and competitive and brutal one for a lot of those.
I think
it's not going to end well for them.
Really. Well, but the thing is, it always has been for men in a way. It's a different level to the way that our let's call it traditional social norms have impacted on women, but the game for men has always had winners and losers.
Exactly.
It's kind of it has been a kind of, are you the right kind of guy?
Yes, exactly. And as many men lose by that as women. Yeah, absolutely.
And most queer men or LGBT men like me were the losers.
Yep.
And we either had to learn how to pass, or eventually we learned how to say, actually, we don't accept these rules.
Yeah.
And I think the problem for a lot of men is that they didn't face that challenge. And I think it's where straight men can learn from gay men, for example, because we were the ones who couldn't pass. Or we were the ones who could pass, got to middle age, and suddenly realized that we had been paying with our mental health for fitting ourselves into a box that wasn't the right box.
But Angus, do you not think for a lot of straight men, maybe not to the same extent, but for a lot of straight men, it's the same. Not every straight man is an alpha male who wants to behave like that.
Well,
and a lot of straight men spend their lives pretending to be something they're not.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's not just about sexuality.
No.
I think, for me personally, straight and gay are constructs. And it's also about masculinity and femininity. It's about, dominance versus submissive or whatever. I've met lots of straight couples where it's like, there's a man and a woman, but the person who's more masculine and more dominant in the relationship, in a way, is actually the woman. It's like, and
though
it's
traditionally,
not that,
of course, that was always laughed at. I mean, that's a source of comedy, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
She wears the trousers.
bossy
She's
way.
yeah.
the shrew or the fishwife or whatever, you know, and I think the term they use now is it cucked? Is that the term that is used for like when men are somehow humiliated?
Yeah.
So I think the thing is that really what we're saying is the people who were the outliers, who just were like at the wrong sides of the bell curve, had to change the bell curve, because otherwise they were doomed to live outside it. And there's learning there for the people right in the middle of the bell curve, and the people who see themselves as being, changing metaphor, right at the top of the pyramid, because actually having power is not always as good as it might appear on paper. It can be very damaging to you as a person. Like, you know, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
You probably find anyway when you get to that there isn't. I mean, power is one of these things. Nobody ever thinks they've got it.
No.
You know, it is one of the things. If you work in government, you watch people, you know, roaming round, taking various positions, whether it's in the civil service or, you know, in the government as a minister, as a prime minister, because they always think that's where the power is, and then they get to there and realise it's not here. You know, power is one of these things I think you very few people actually experience having power, because when you get to the position that you think is powerful, turns out it's not there, you know. But it doesn't stop people going for it, of course. Do you think those people that trolled your site, that you were talking about, do you think you could engage them positively in a conversation to explore what's going on there, or are they just unreachable?
No, I think, well, I always try to have the conversation. So when it's on my personal Twitter account, I'm probably more combative, because it's like I'm not speaking on behalf of Barefoot Man. If you go to the Barefoot Man Instagram, we've actually become a much more positive community. People used to come on to attack us, but we would respond and we would call them out. There was a lot of virtue signaling. People, there were a lot of what I would call white saviors. You know, it's like, we know that we started with a rowing team at an English university. And that is not a very diverse beginning. The way that we were celebrating diversity was the person who wasn't in front of the camera, which was me. I was very different to these guys. I had a different sexuality. I was from a different generation. And I had been failed by a lot of the systems that had made them winners all their lives. You know, these were guys who were the alpha males. A lot of them now do work at big name blue chip companies. And I was somebody who had been bullied, who had been failed by the education system, who had struggled to find my place in life as a man. So the diversity was not visible. The diversity was in our intention and in our message. And a lot of people called us out on what they could see rather than listening to what we were saying. And social media have given us an opportunity to open up that conversation. There was a guy a couple of months ago who was saying, this image lacks diversity. You cannot claim to be speaking about diversity because there's no diversity in this image. And I said, do you understand that when a big corporation has the perfect representation of every possible kind of person, it's because they went to modeling agencies with a list with percentages and said, send us this. I said, and those people are being paid to be there in that image, to suggest a set of moral and ethical values that are not true. That company doesn't actually feel that way necessarily. They may aspire to it, but what they've actually done is they haven't gone to their own staff to get these people. They went to modeling agencies to get people who create an appearance of equity and diversity, and absolutely, diverse visibility is very important. But I was saying to this guy, the thing is that we don't pay. And he came back with, well, that's just the most ignorant thing I've ever heard, because those people probably were grateful for that work. And I'm like, yeah, okay. We're not trying to take jobs away from minorities by, preventing their progress in the modeling industry. You're looking at this through the wrong end of the telescope. We are a project that features people who have come forward and are making themselves vulnerable as part of an authentic commitment to change, and they stand for something. And as we change as a project, those men change too. We get more older people, more black people, more people who don't have washboard stomachs. And some people will still come along and say, okay, I can see 3 black people, but where are the fat people? Or where are the disabled people? And it's like, well, yeah, we didn't go to an agency. We're not filling a quota. We are trying to create an authentic visibility for new behaviors, new ways of looking at masculinity, new ways of looking at men, and new ways that men can look at the world. And I really think, I have seen, since we really started having that conversation on Instagram, the virtue signalers and the white saviors have fallen away, because I use them to get the conversation going. And then people come in and say, yeah, actually, that's what this project's always been about. And yeah. So I absolutely think that we can have that conversation.
And you can engage them, yeah. Because I think that is the answer to it. And it is, I'm always fascinated by why people do that. Why people feel angry enough to comment in an aggressive way. I mean, there's something...
Oh,
it's an interesting question.
I think, I think that's a whole other podcast, for sure. But I think it's fascinating, because I understand it. It's about validation. It's about it's like, why do people wear Rolex watches? Why do people buy a Mercedes-Benz instead of a Ford? Why, we do a lot of things which are to indicate to other people who we are. And social media has become a place where you show people who you are through dissent and attack. And it's very debilitating. And it's a whole other area that, and it's something that we have really dealt with a lot in this project. Because, both personally and as a project, we get it from both sides. When we featured, we did an interview with we did a live Instagram chat with Cindy Gallop, an incredible feminist and advocate for women's perspectives. She runs a project called Make Love Not Porn, which is about I suppose addressing how the straight male gaze has fueled pornography culture, and how she, as a woman, when she sleeps with a man, she has to basically teach him how to have sex, because he has learned how to have sex from porn. Yeah, and we didn't actually, going back to the whole King's College thing, we didn't talk about that, the effect of porn on younger men, but that must have an effect. It's absolutely colossal, and I think we have to talk about that probably another time, really. Or maybe we can come to it in that podcast if we do the podcast with Mark. But porn, I think, is where young people of all genders are learning about sex. And I don't think it's good for any of them.
No.
But, you know, we featured Cindy in this Instagram chat, and it was for International Women's Day, and we got attacked by a female podcaster who said, centering on men on International Women's Day, I don't think so. I mean, I'm imagining how she spoke. Actually, I'm not, because I listened to her podcast. That's exactly how she spoke.
But Angus, this is good stuff. I mean, you're putting this stuff out here because you want to engage people in debate. So
Yes.
you're engaging people in debate.
I totally am.
And even if they're coming in, you know, with hostility, that may just be, I mean, it's just the mode.
No,
To
sure,
some
yeah,
extent, it's
yeah.
the mode of social media is aggression, but it doesn't alter the fact that it's fantastic that people are reacting.
Yeah, we didn't
You
win
know?
with her. She just kept coming back. And she was like, you're going to find your hardcore. Like, but people are very invested in their positions. So it is a challenge to overcome those. You know, you really have to sort of say, I know you're really invested here, but really consider the possibility it might be a bad investment. And I think that is really at the heart of what our policy development is going to be about, to bring it back and sort of wrap it up. But I think that Barefoot Man's policy goals are about recognizing how invested we are in established positions, and how they may be poor investments, and that, you know, there are ways to move our investments around and get a better return. Oh, I really saw that metaphor through, didn't I?
I think there's a whole new article just waiting to be written there.
Susan, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank you for joining Barefoot Man. Without even there being a paid position, we particularly appreciate that. You came to our strategy day.
I know.
Yeah, and
I
you've been
know.
with us ever since.
Well, you know, I have hopes for a scented candle.
Yes, yeah, we've noted that. And I'm already on it. I'm already on it. The scented candle, I'm putting that on a list.
Good.
Thank you, and we'll speak again soon.
Good.